With Guernsey's election approaching, candidates are starting to publicly declare their intention to stand before being formally nominated in May. So campaigns are already starting, and we've already seen the formation of the island's first new political party. Forward Guernsey has 4 candidates and is hoping to attract more, saying that party politics is the only way to get past the feeling of inertia that many voters have had in the states of Guernsey over the past 4 years. 2 of the party's members joined me to discuss their campaign plans and what they intend to do if they are elected in June.
Yes, good morning. Deputy Gavin Pier, seeking re-election as a candidate for Forward Guernsey.
And Tom?
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, my name's Tom Rylatt. I will be standing for the first time as a new candidate, also as part of Forward Guernsey.
Okay, Tom, I'm actually going to start with you then. Why are you standing for election for the first time in Guernsey, for the first time anywhere, I'm guessing? But
yes.
Why?
Well, it's not because I ever dreamed of being a candidate or a politician, but I'm very grateful to have grown up in Guernsey, as I think most people who get to adulthood are, and once they've been to the university and they realise what the UK is like, you know, when they get a broader perspective, you realise actually how special it is and how unique it is to have grown up on an island like Guernsey. So when I see my peers leaving Guernsey, when I see that they are shut out of the property market, when the cost of living is prohibitive to living here, and then I look at the government that's supposed to be helping solve those problems and encouraging them to stay, I don't see that voice or that perspective represented at all. I don't think out of 40 deputies, I don't think we have one under the age of 37 or 38, which means there's, I think over 20,000 islanders without direct representation there. So I'd love to try and represent that voice and be able to help keep the next generation of islanders on Guernsey, because if we don't do that, there's a very, very real risk, as I've said before, Guernsey can lose its sense of self. And alongside that, I think rebuilding trust back in the state of Guernsey is another key aim of and purpose of why I'm standing. So yeah.
Okay, some of those themes you've touched on we'll come back to, but Gavin, if I can put the same question to you, you're very well known in the island already. This is your 4th election, but why are you standing?
Yes, a very good and a very fair question. I'm standing because I think there is so much more that still needs to be done, and with a system, an electoral system, a system of government which is in which it is proven it is so difficult for an individual to actually help deliver change and to initiate positive change. That's the reason that I feel it's worth standing again, but standing in a different way. In other words, as part of a party, as part of a group who are committed to delivering a clear programme for government. So it's really an effort to deliver more effective a government, and that's why I think it's worth giving it another go for the 4th time.
Okay, and so this time you're both standing under the party Forward Guernsey. And when it was announced on Friday, there were 4 candidates named, so both of yourselves, Rona Humphreys and Ryan Courtney. And there was immediately a reaction on social media around Mr. Courtney's inclusion in Forward Guernsey. Now, he's not here today, and nor is Miss Humphreys. Is there a reason why either of them are not here today?
Well, neither of them are here today because they're both working, and they will be. Obviously they'll need to manage their time during an election campaign, but they're both still working. And
for Mr. Courtney then, in particular, a lot of people will have read what's been said about him, but he is still a candidate for Forward Guernsey. Can we explore that?
He is. I mean, to be honest, there's very little that I can say, other than just re-emphasising that Mr. Courtney has not been arrested or investigated in relation to the allegations that have appeared on social media.
Okay, and as we said, he's not here to answer for himself, so it wouldn't be fair to keep pushing it if he's not here. Obviously, the opportunity for him to be interviewed is open, as it has been to you two today. But if we can explore then Forward Guernsey. So as we said, Forward Guernsey launched 4 candidates, possibly more, but what is Forward Guernsey?
Well, Forward Guernsey is a party, so it has been formed specifically in accordance with Guernsey's reform law, Guernsey's electoral law, in order to present candidates and in order to enable the electorate to see on as we know within our very unique electoral system, we have a very long ballot paper with a long list of names, but it will be easy for the electorate to see that those candidates are working together because they'll be highlighted by a logo on the ballot paper. And the reason that Forward Guernsey has been formed is in order to stand by, behind and to endorse the Future Guernsey manifesto in its entirety. So we are picking that up and adopting it, and that is the central piece of each of our personal manifestos, given that it covers the sort of the 6 key policy priorities for government as identified by Future Guernsey's research last summer. There's a whole raft of other policy decisions that will need to be made, and there is no party position on those. So the candidates that stand for Forward Guernsey will remain as with any other candidate who's elected currently. They'll have an independent view in relation to those other policy issues. But on the core priorities, there is a very clear policy programme.
So if I may as well, Laura, sorry. Yeah. I mean, like most people in Guernsey, I have shared in the past a healthy scepticism of organised politics, of parties. You know, it's not been always done to the best of people's abilities in the past, as we've seen. But you have to, I think, balance that against the fact that term after term after term, people have been dissatisfied with how much has been done. And Guernsey is facing challenges now that we can't afford to, in my opinion, gamble another 4 years on 38 deputies all pulling in different directions. And I think where Forward Guernsey strikes a really good balance is it offers cohesion on those top 6 policy priorities that Gavin mentioned, but also it respects the tradition of independence that we have in our State's Assembly, in that issues that fall outside of the manifesto, and there are numerous issues that I'm going to be campaigning on as well, party members can vote however they like. So I think it respects the tradition of Guernsey politics while offering something new and something that we really need to consider and give serious thought to. And that's why I'm with Gavin and Rona and Ryan, and hopefully more people trying to do this.
So you think Guernsey is now ready for party politics?
Well, I think that's why we're here. Yeah. We're ready to have that conversation over the next 2 months, and I am willing to speak to anyone who's a sceptic of this and have that conversation and say why we need it. This is the way we've gone about doing this is not the way parties were gone about last time. There is as Future Guernsey have well publicised, this is a manifesto we're adopting that has been put together by a large group of local experts and volunteers. As I said, no political manifesto in Guernsey's history has had more local input than this one, in my opinion. So I'm willing to stand behind that, and I think having people coalesce behind these ideas with a view to actually delivering rather than delaying and postponing, as we've seen over the last 4 years, I think is the way to go about it. And if we can just have that conversation with as many people as possible, I think by June the 18th there's a good chance we will be more ready for it. How
do you intend to have those conversations with as many people as possible? An island-wide election, there's a lot of square miles to cover in this island.
No, you're right. It's a challenge, but I mean, for example, myself and Gavin did a surgery at Beausejour on Saturday. We spoke to islanders about housing, about renting, about healthcare, so many different things. And Gavin's been doing that since January. You know, getting in front of people, talking with them. Personally, I'll be going to cafes. I'll be knocking on some doors. And as I said, I think while social media is an important part of this campaign, obviously, because you can't knock on every single door, we shouldn't lose touch of the fact that islanders, I think, want to have conversations and know the people that they're potentially voting for are going to have represent them.
I think one of the other attractions of a party for candidates is the opportunity and the ability to actually work together as a team, which, frankly is, let's face it, is how most people work in their daily lives as part of a team, and it's also most people play team sports and so on. So this is not an unusual way in which to organise as a group of people. But for example, going back to your question about campaigning, that's one of the things where, as a team, we may be able to work together and help support each other, depending on how many candidates there finally are, in terms of being able to actually organise traditional door knocking in a way which is quite hard if you are, one candidate out of 100 trying to cover the entire 32,000 electors.
I want to start then with Forward Guernsey. So if we take a little step back to Forward Guernsey and Future Guernsey, how do the two link together?
Well, that's very straightforward. There is no link between them at all.
Arguably there is. Please
No.
explain why there's not.
Well, no, there is no argument that there is, because there isn't. Genuinely, there isn't. I was a political advisor to Future Guernsey from its formation, through its research stage, through the policy development stage. So I assisted in that process of helping them craft their manifesto. But I've resigned that position. I resigned that position after the launch of the manifesto, and there's no funding stream. There's no reliance on any of their resources that they have, and that is the way that it needs to be in accordance with Guernsey's electoral law. So we absolutely have to be rigidly compliant with that. We understand that, and that provides the reason for there being no contact between the two.
But I would say, Forward Guernsey, Future Guernsey, we completely get. If it sounds unusual, frankly, that's because it is. The way the law is set up now in Guernsey is that if you want to build a party, if you want to properly research, get volunteers together and experts together, build a manifesto, publicise it, and then put forward and promote election candidates, it's practically impossible to do all that and stay compliant with the rules. So we understand it's confusing, but we truly believe in this manifesto and these ideas, and this is the only legitimate way of going about doing that. So hopefully come next election things will be much simpler, and we appreciate there's confusion, but unfortunately, I think the State of Guernsey possibly has more to answer for than we do for the way they've set the rules.
The other thing I would say, just in relation to the whole question of the regulation of political parties and expense rules and everything else, is, as with many things in Guernsey, because there's never been a requirement for it before, frankly, what's there is not fit for purpose. So there is no regulation of political parties. All there is a registration process, and then a regulation around spending in an election period. There's no constraint, for example, on donations, whether donations come from inside the island or outside the island, or the extent of those donations, the purpose of what they can be used for. None of that exists. And frankly, if we are to move into an era of more organised professional politics with other political parties, which may well be the case in the future, then we will absolutely need to ensure that we have a proper framework that enables that to take place. And then some of the what we've talked about would no longer be necessary, but that's not the case at the moment.
Is that something that Forward Guernsey candidates will seek to do then, if you are elected as a group to the States of Guernsey? If there's enough of you, will you look to change those regulations?
It's not part of the manifesto, and it's not something that we've discussed as a group. I mean, I'm offering that as my personal view and my personal experience up to this point. But I think it would be the responsible thing to do, to initiate that kind of discussion and debate quite early in the new states, so that actually by the time you get to the next election, you do have a proper framework. But let's face it, the whole focus of the Future Guernsey Manifesto is on the island's priorities.
Yeah.
So we have to recognise, where some of these things fit in terms of the prioritisation of government work. But on the other hand, you do need to have a proper architecture in place if you're going to have a well-functioning democratic process and system.
And as you said, it might not be a priority for the island or for the public, but Gavin, as we know, you've been in the States a long time. I've spent a long time listening to the States. Actually, if these little issues aren't sorted out, they do cause problems down the line. But on the manifesto then, Tom, when you were talking earlier, you mentioned in quite some detail about keeping young people in the island, and that is, it's not the top priority in the Future Guernsey manifesto that's been adopted by Forward Guernsey, but it is one of them. Is that your personal top priority?
It sits alongside rebuilding trust in government for me, because I think if government doesn't have the trust of the people it serves, then it can't do many things properly. But I think this manifesto serves the need to keep young people on island through several aspects. So one of the policies that I'm most excited about, that I think is a real possible game changer here, is the additional earned allowance, which in simple terms would allow 16 to 30-year-olds on island to save up to £20,000 in tax to go towards, for example, a deposit on a house. Now, I think about my situation with, my girlfriend. We both rent, and if we lived here for the last five or so years, we would both now be 2/3 of the way to a deposit. That is the case for so many friends of mine now who also rent or they live with their parents, and so many of my friends who've left the island simply because they couldn't afford to live here, and the state of play in the housing market has shut them out. I also am really behind the ambition of setting out clear rights for landlords and tenants. I also have young friends and families I know who have literally been kicked out of their rental properties because they couldn't afford the upkeep that the landlords were putting on them. And they said, right, well, the grass is greener in the UK, and that's forced them out. So we need to make sure the rental market, while young people are saving, is hospitable to them. To landlords as well, we need to strike that balance. But I think the additional earned allowance is a really key part. Obviously, there are also other provisions within the manifesto to increase housing supply, so to offset any possible inflationary pressure that the additional allowance would bring about. But yeah, that's primarily why I'm so positive about the manifesto, and why I think it's the best chance we've seen so far at keeping young people on island.
Okay, and I definitely don't want to pinpoint you as the young candidate or anything like that, but you did also reference before that you would be, if you are elected, you will be possibly the youngest elected politician in Guernsey. I believe there's a 20-year-old candidate to declare as well.
Yes.
Do you think that will make a difference, though, in our government if those younger voices are actually represented in the Assembly during those debates?
Well, I would like to think so. I mean, if I look at the current makeup of the Assembly now, and I wonder how many of them can relate to someone who is really worried about how they're going to make rent the next month. I worry about, as I've said before, for many of our deputies, raising a family, buying a house, having and building a career here are in the rearview mirror. So that perspective isn't brought into the State's Assembly, and that perspective isn't reflected in the decisions it makes. And because we have so few deputies facing those challenges at that earlier stage of life, we have young people on island who are completely disengaged from the process.
Yeah.
They don't have anyone they can relate to in there, or probably feel as though they can bring their problems to. So I think having a balance of, any successful business will tell you, a team that brings a diversity of perspectives tend to be better problem solvers. And I think, we shouldn't expect that to be any different from the States. The States has unfortunately a narrow range of perspectives, and no shortage of problems that have gone unsolved.
As a young adult, though, saving up then for your first home purchase, will you be able to prioritise your political work then if you are successful in being elected? Will that, I don't want to discuss your personal finances or anything like that, or what you're currently earning or anything, but essentially, will it be your full-time priority?
Yes, I'm firmly of the belief that being a deputy or politician, it should be a calling, not a career, and it should be a vocation. So if I am elected, it will be my full and absolute focus. And I part ways with many deputies who see it as a part-time job. I think, no, if you've been given the mandate by the people on this island, then it should be your only and full focus, really.
Some of the issues, though, that you and I could sit here for hours and discuss, I'm sure, potentially could have been dealt with by the current or previous states. Deputy Gavin St Pier, you've been in the States now since 2012, I think. Why have some of these issues not been dealt with, and what will you do differently, potentially, to resolve some of these issues if re-elected?
I mean, it's a very fair and reasonable challenge to present. You've been there for all these years, and the problems are still there.
What have you done?
What have you done? And again, you don't have to scratch very far on social media to find that view. And the reality is we have to recognise that it is a function of our system. We have chosen to work with a system which is really quite clunky, but also has no common purpose or direction. And so, in effect, with the island-wide system now, it's a low information election for the electorate. They have a telephone book of glossy pictures, maybe a few short videos on which to make a selection of people. Day after election day, 38 names have dropped out of the machine, and they say, okay, these 38 are now elected. On day one of the government, you're now saying, you are the government. Go off and work for the next 4 years together. And of course, the civil service look at that and go, okay, well, what do you want us to do? And it takes time for those 38 people then to come together and say, well, to try and find some kind of plan, to create some kind of common plan. And I think it's that systemic ineffectiveness that is absolutely built into the design of the way we work, and that is a fundamental reason why we're seeking to have a different approach, to be able to hit the ground running with a clear plan for the next 4 years, and however many deputies Forward Guernsey is able to get elected, hopefully we're able to get some elected. Whatever the number is, we still would hope that the effort that has gone into producing, by Future Guernsey, to producing this manifesto, much of which a lot of people would agree with, maybe other deputies won't agree with it all, but they'll agree with enough of it, that there will be a clear framework that can then help inform the work of the next government, and ensuring that it can be more effective, but also quicker in its decision making.
If I might say as well, Laura, and I promise this isn't a line Gavin has given me to say, I genuinely believe this. Voters, deputies, we all acknowledge in one way or another that what we have now does not work. We have to do something differently. And I think, speaking as an individual, I think Gavin deserves real credit, because everyone's saying it's not working, but he is the one who's saying, well, here's a solution to it. I think we have a political culture where we analyse problems, to the nth degree, but the offering of solutions is less. So I think this deserves, real consideration, and I think it's refreshing that something bold and ambitious is being put forward. It's why I was attracted to the party anyway.
Very kind of you to say so. I mean, the other observation I would make is for those that say, oh, I don't like the idea of parties, or I want to get rid of all the existing deputies and just put in 38 new people. It's a perspective, it's a view. My advice would be, well, kind of be careful what you wish for, because all you will end up with is, just imagine an assembly full of 38 new faces, equally all independent, equally with no common plan. There's no reason to expect that would produce any different result than the last few states have produced. And Einstein's definition of madness, doing the same thing again and expecting a different result. So we have to try something different, and if it's not this, then absolutely somebody else come up with something different. But what I would say is those that punt for reform of government, we just need executive government, we need fewer deputies, we need to give a small number of people executive authority and they can make the decision. Well, maybe that's a solution, but that's not going to happen on June the 18th, 2025. That reform may be years away before it's ever implemented. In the meantime, we've still got to be making these decisions about how to get more houses, how to get a fairer tax system, how to get our economy more productive. And executive government is not a plan to deliver those priorities.
If you are re-elected, Gavin, and the first thing the states do is elect the President of Policy and Resources, will you be going for that role again?
I genuinely don't know the answer
Okay.
to that question. In all the previous elections I've stood, I've always made it clear what position I would be seeking the other side of election if I'm fortunate enough to be re-elected as States Deputy. This time, I genuinely don't know, because I think it really will depend on the composition of the next Assembly, where I am best serving. I would like to serve in a more productive and senior decision making role, policy making role than I have during this term, where I've spent most of the time on the back benches and have carved a role in that way, and it's been very enjoyable and it's been very different, and I've got a different perspective. I think I'm ready to be doing something that is more focused on policy making, but where that is will depend on the composition of the new states. And I would also say that having worn the T-shirt for 4 years as the President of Policy and Resources, as the Chief Minister, I know how difficult a job it is. I know how little influence you really have over the rest of government. I know how much of your time is spent simply reacting to events rather than being able to properly strategically plan and actually influence the direction of government and policy. So in other words, it's actually it's a nice title and it's a nice role, but actually in terms of being able to transform the direction of government, it doesn't have the level of influence and power that people might imagine it has. And therefore, whether it's the right, who is the right person to occupy it, will depend very much on the composition of the new Assembly.
Okay, and in terms of your priorities then, so having been in the States for, was it 13 years then?
13
yes. Years, yep. Having had those roles previously, been on the back benches, what are your current priorities, obviously sitting behind the Future Guernsey manifesto, and how has that changed over this past 4 years or previous years?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, I think the Future Guernsey manifesto has been built recognising that the 6 priorities are all interlinked and that you can't really touch one without having an impact on the other. So it's quite hard to sort of rank or prioritise them, and that's not the basis on which the manifesto has been built. I mean, clearly the housing crisis is a central issue which has built up over the last 4 years. I mean, I think as others have said, in the previous term, when the population hadn't really moved, the economy was in a different place, actually housing wasn't really as high a political priority and a public priority as it has subsequently become. But absolutely, there are some significant issues there. But for me, actually producing a fairer tax system is absolutely critical to us now. We know that our tax system is unsustainable in terms of meeting our future needs. But I also know, having been responsible for the Treasury for 8 years, that frankly we tinkered, because that's all we could do. We tinkered with the tax system in order to raise a bit more revenue here. We expanded the scope of 0-10 from banks to include all financial services. We changed the rates of property taxation and so on. But we were really, frankly, just tinkering around the edges. Yeah. And a fundamental review of our tax system is absolutely what is needed now. Because all of those changes over the years, the change in the demographic composition of the island, in other words, an older population with fewer smaller percentage of those people still working, puts a greater and greater burden on the younger generation, on Tom and his generation, which is not only unfair, but also ultimately is unsustainable. So we absolutely have to address that, and that for me is one of the things that I'd like to see change in the next term.
And so, got to ask then actually, GST. I wasn't planning to ask about it, but you've brought up then the tax system, and I appreciate it is much more than GST, and actually what the states have adopted is GST plus,
yes.
So changes to social security as well. Future Guernsey, the manifesto, and Forward Guernsey, the political party, but where do you individually sit then on the introduction of GST? I believe work is already slightly delayed, but it is ongoing in the background to introduce it in the summer of 2027.
Yes, again, as you said, I mean, I think the question often is boiled down to and presented as, well, are you pro or against GST? And indeed, I was in part of the tax policy group for Future Guernsey that helped create the tax policy here, and of course it became a central question to that work as well. But actually what's emerged from that group is something which is, I think is much more pragmatic and recognises that actually reforming the tax system requires you to carry the community with you on that journey and on that change. And that means, hence why the Future Guernsey plan presents a 6-step approach to this. We absolutely have got to focus on economic growth. We've got to grow the size of the pie. We have to deliver more efficient government, and actually injecting a 1% reduction in the size of government for the next 4 years is about signalling to the community. And by the way, 1% is quite modest for an organisation of this size. That would produce savings of 25 million a year by 2029 out of a budget of currently 650 million. That is eminently achievable in any organisation. And experience over the last 10 years is most committees actually underspend their budget. So that 1% is achievable, but injecting that in is a demonstration to the public that you're doing what you can to make government more effective before you come after them for more taxation. Making sure that we've got a proper capital expenditure programme so we actually know when cash is going to be required. At the moment, we're told, well, we need £1 billion. So we need to raise taxation, but we're not going to spend all that billion in a year. So let's have a very clear idea of our cash flows, because that will inform how much we need to raise in each year. In other words, how much taxation we need each year. Fixing the tax administration, we know, everybody knows. I think the last final assessment I've had is 2021. Everything appears to be disappearing into a black hole right now. You will not convince the public that they need to be paying more when they do not believe that the government is collecting everything that is already owed. We have to sort that problem out. Corporate tax reform, there are definitely things that can be done to improve the fairness of the corporate tax system and closing what are currently very legitimate tax loopholes, particularly in relation to the use of companies by high net worth individuals. The numbers, the amount of revenue raised will be several million a year. It's not the silver bullet, but again, you need to do it. You need to be seen to be doing it, and then that takes you to the reform of the tax system. Now, if consumption taxes, such as goods and services taxes, are to play a role, you have to have a much deeper reform than just the so-called GST plus of a bit of tinkering with income tax and a bit of tinkering with social security. At the moment, all we're really doing is grafting GST onto the income tax system and cutting income tax a bit. That, in essence, is what the GST plus model is. If consumption tax is to play a role, you've got to have a deeper reform which really does protect your lower and middle income earners. Now, all of that can be done, but it can only be done if you properly lift the drains on the whole tax system rather than just tinkering. And having done 8 years of tinkering, I realise that your room for manoeuvre is pretty limited, which frankly is why we've ended up with GST plus. And unless we're bold, we're not going to make much further progress.
I was just going to say, I think there's, again, the importance of having a diversity of perspective in the States as well. The reality is, and I don't know how fair or unfair this is that most of the people in the Assembly aren't going to be massively affected by 5% GST. They're going to be limited in their ability to empathise with people like, myself or younger islanders who, really don't know how they're going to make that work with an extra 5% on top of, your weekly food. So what we're saying essentially is the headline is, before government comes to the average person with an ask of a consumption tax, the states better have made damn sure that it is closing loopholes, that it is getting every penny it can from sources other than the individual taxpayer before we even consider putting another burden on the average islander. So that's, I think, sets out why we've approached GST in the way we have, having a balanced perspective and trying to make things fairer, essentially.
The wheels are already in motion for GST to come in, though, and Gavin, this might again be another question for you. With your experience in the Treasury, there's going to come a point where it's too late to stop it happening, regardless of any other changes or that happen in the makeup of the civil service or any other changes elsewhere in government. I mean, what realistically can be done to make those changes to reassure the public that we're not being asked to pay more without in return?
I mean, I think I would strongly encourage people to take a look at the Future Guernsey manifesto in relation to the tax plan, because I think it is much more nuanced than GST bad or GST good, and therefore that's why you do need the 6-step plan. But what the Future Guernsey manifesto also goes on to say is that there should be a commitment to deliver the new tax package by March 2026. So in other words, that's not implementation, but it's taking a detailed plan for approval to the states by March next year, which is 9 months, which is quite an aggressive time frame. But is informed, as you've said, Laura, by my own experience of being with the government. I think that is eminently achievable because a lot of the work has already been done. The information is there, the options are there. It now needs to be put it together and presented in a package to the states. So I think it can definitely be done. And then that allows you the time to implement the reform between March 2026 during the rest of the period of the state. So I can't give definitive timelines on when things might change, but I think aiming to get a states agreement by March next year is eminently achievable.
Okay, and everything could be achieved if the right people are elected to the states. Both of you obviously are standing, as we said, Rowan Humphreys and Ryan Courtney also standing under the Forward Guernsey, as part of Forward Guernsey behind the Future Guernsey manifesto. But you're looking for more candidates as well, is that right?
Well, we are, and I'm happy to say that I think we're having a lot of quite exciting conversations behind the scenes with people who are really enthused by the project and interested in it.
Current deputies, former candidates, any hints on who or new names?
Well, at this point, no, but I can assure you, Laura, you will be the first to find out when we're ready to announce. Hopefully future candidates as part of Forward Guernsey. But we're having an event, for example, tomorrow evening at the Cotills, an open evening for potential candidates who might be interested. And yeah, I think,
yes, we do hope there will be more. I mean, the focus has to be on quality. This is not a numbers game at all. And it can't be. This is about attracting those who want to work as part of a team. I mean, there is a judgment to be made by candidates on whether they think, whether they want to get elected and how they get elected. But actually, it's more important that they make a judgment that this is the way they want to do politics in Guernsey. Okay. So actually ensuring that candidates have an alignment, not only with the policy, but with the rest of the team, with the way that we intend to work is a critical part of it. And actually, we intend to have a team building exercise in May so that we can help bring a group of people who may not know each other very well to come together. The process itself is, again, something that's never happened in Guernsey. There's an application process with an application form, CV, criminal records check, declaration of interests, an independent selection panel, which all of us have been through, including me. And what I would say of that, it was refreshingly challenging. Okay.
Are you able to tell us who's on that panel?
No, I mean, they're people who volunteered. It is a panel of people who have been drawn on for the first group.
But they challenged you?
Very much so.
I can tell you, yeah, it was. I mean, having trained as a barrister, I'm very used to interviews of attrition, and yeah, it was thorough.
Okay.
And yeah, so again, a very different approach. There's also those who stand as candidates will be expected to commit to a code of conduct, party code of conduct. Obviously, there's a state's members' code of conduct, but the party code of conduct is about adhering to the commitments you're making to the public. So that obviously the selection process is intended to find those who are committed to the programme. But actually, if in a couple of years' time somebody who is elected then walks away from their commitments, we need to have a way of dealing with that, and that's what the electorate expect. We saw that last time. The electorate felt that they had been promised things by candidates who then did a 180-degree turn. And in a democratic system, you cannot prevent that, but what we can do is put the architecture in place that helps give a reassurance that the prospect of that happening is minimised, and that's what we're seeking to do.
So candidates declare their intention to, or they're nominated to stand for election in May. When do we find out who is in Forward Guernsey beyond the four of you?
Well, I mean, as more candidates have moved through the process, then I imagine we will announce that.
Okay.
But on what sort of time frame, I don't really know. But of course, the 14th of May, nominations close, and in that sense, that will be the final cut-off, because people will need to register whether they're part of a party at that point, and in order that the ballot paper can be prepared. So 14th of May is the absolute deadline, but I would anticipate that if we have more candidates, we'll be seeking to announce those before then.
And if I may, Laura, some people have said, well, what's the point of a party unless you've got 21 plus candidates and you can get a majority on every vote? And I mean, it's a fair question, but ultimately it's still of massive value. Let's say if a party gets 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 candidates in, you are still a halfway there to getting a policy passed, whereas before, under the current system, you're one individual and you need to convince another 20 people to come round to your way of thinking. So by having a cohesive group thinking the same way on the top 6 policy priorities, it's a far more efficient way of passing things through the states. Also, I think, going to be a far more efficient way of conducting states debates. Because at the minute, you have debates where you have unanimous votes. You have 38 people voting the same way, but they've somehow managed to spend 2.5 hours talking about it. If you have a group of, let's say, 12 to 18 candidates, they might pick 2 people to speak for them on that topic, and you have almost halved or possibly even more the debate time. So you're making a more efficient and effective states by having it, even if you don't have a overwhelming majority. I think it's a much better way of doing things compared to what we do now.
But just to re-emphasise, we are not targeting a number of candidates. It may just be the 4 of us. We hope there'll be more, but we are absolutely determined to stick to the focus on the process that we've had up to date and the delivery of quality, and working with people who want to work in this way and to work with this manifesto.
And essentially, it'll be the public of Guernsey who are registered to vote, aged over 16, who will decide who makes up the next states of Guernsey. Tom, you're clearly very engaged in politics for a young adult, but I was looking through the latest data for sign-ups yesterday, and actually your age group, so the kind of 25 to 35 age group, is among the lowest, has amongst the lowest level of sign-ups to register to vote. They have to sign up to vote by the 30th of April. Is there any message you'd say on that? And it's obviously not saying that anyone who signs up to vote will vote for you or for any Forward Guernsey candidate. They might deliberately vote against you guys, but people need to be registered to vote anyway, don't they?
Yes. Whether it's for me or anyone else, the message to young people is just get registered to vote. If you don't register to vote, you're letting other people decide your future for you. I posted about this on my campaign page yesterday, actually, in that it really is shocking and worrying that there are so many issues now that will dictate our futures. So housing, jobs, climate change, that will massively turn on this election. Yet we don't seem to be participating in the way that we really need to. But I would also balance that against the fact that, can you really blame young people for being disengaged from the process? Deputies, apart from Gavin and a number of others, don't really communicate on social media. They don't make themselves known and make the business of government accessible. We've grown up in a world with YouTube and Instagram, yet the States is the only government in the British Isles that doesn't visually broadcast its debates. And we've managed to put the election in the middle of GCSEs and A-levels. So if you've got all of that, you think, well, fair enough that you're not engaged. So I think but again, as I said, and I said this on my page, if I am elected, making sure young people are included every step of the way is going to be one of the key factors of why I'm standing. So I've committed to saying, look, every 3 months, hopefully more, I'm going to be meeting with the Youth Commission and representatives, student representatives from the secondary schools and sixth forms to ensure that young voice is always listened to, it's engaged, and it's represented by the States of Guernsey. Because I always say, if young people don't feel they have a say in the future, why on earth do we think they're going to stay for the future? It's a bit cheesy, but I genuinely believe it. And I think if they feel they're listened to, they have a stake in things, they have influence, then hopefully they'll feel like a valued stakeholder and that their government is working for them. So that's the attitude I'd bring if I'm elected.
I think my key message to anybody who is not currently registered, of whatever age, is to truly understand that you may think that politics is boring and politics isn't for you, or politics is only for the big issues like education, or and you may not have a stake at that at the moment, so it's not particularly interesting to you. The reality is politics, the political system, ultimately determines everything we all do every single day of the week. It determines from the amount of tax there is on a litre of fuel to the price of a pint of milk, because we decide how are we going to support or not support our dairy industry, to the time you can go to the pub. There is not a single thing we do in our lives where there is not ultimately a political decision. So if for those who think that politics is not relevant to them, they're kind of missing quite a big piece of the story, which is actually, it's far more influential on your life than you probably either would like, but certainly you'd imagine. And the only way to have a say in that is to get involved in the political process and make a decision. And if the only thing you need to do that is to vote once every 4 years, then please do it. It doesn't have to be for Forward Guernsey candidates, but make a conscious choice rather than letting it happen to you.
Sorry, Tom.
No.
Go on.
Sorry, I shouldn't need to add to that, but I think it's really useful to also say that if there are any 16 or 17-year-olds listening, or people who know 16 or 17-year-olds, Guernsey is one of only, I think, 10 places in the world where 16-year-olds have the right to vote. That is a real privilege, and it's rare. And it's one of the few things we do well in terms of engaging young people. So to be given that responsibility is really important to use that, because there are people in countries who would and do die for that right to be able to have a say and influence things. So I've been out to my old secondary school, St Sampson's, way before I was declared as a candidate, to try and get young people registered to vote. So for the people listening to this, anyone of that age that you do know, I think I've always found that quite a powerful message, and I would try and relay that as widely as possible.
Okay, final question from me to both of you. What are you going to do if you don't get elected in June?
Well, you plan to succeed.
You do, but there will be 100, say, candidates. There's only 38 seats. If you don't get elected, what will you do? It's
a really good question. I care deeply about rebuilding bridges between islanders and the States of Guernsey, and about keeping young people on island. So I'm not putting these issues forward as part of my campaign because I think it's electorally useful. It's because I genuinely do care about this. So if I'm not elected, then I will find ways of making sure people like Gavin have this on their agenda if Gavin is elected, and keeping deputies on their toes and pushing these as issues, because I want to try and help, whether that's in government or out of it.
If I'm not elected, I mean, I've like Tom, you plan to succeed, and I've put a lot of energy into this, and given much of my experience over the last 12, 13 years has informed this whole project. If I'm not elected, I think the first thing I will do is probably take a couple of weeks off, probably go away and have some quiet time and work out what's next. The answer is I don't really know. I'm putting my all into this for now, And we'll see. It is the decision for the electorate. They are going to be presented with a very real and a very different choice. We hope that they will engage with that and want to support it. If they choose not to, that is absolutely the democratic right. And for us as individuals, we will obviously work out what to do next.